In the year 2063, Earth is on the brink of collapse due to relentless droughts, famine, and climate change, leaving humanity desperate for survival. With advanced technology, humans discover a potentially habitable planet and decide to send a 30-member crew on an 86-year scouting mission to determine its viability. Knowing the mission's length, the original crew understands they will spend their lives in space, and it will be their descendants who finally reach the planet. To address the emotional toll of leaving Earth behind, 30 babies are conceived via in vitro fertilization and raised in isolation to prevent them from forming attachments to the planet they will never know. Richard, an astronaut involved in the project, is deeply concerned about whether these children will be equipped to handle the mission's inevitable challenges. 6 years later, he visits the isolated facility in a protective suite and is surprised when the children warmly embrace him. Viewing him as a father figure, taking responsibility for their education and well-being, Richard ensures they sleep well and personally bids goodnight to Christopher, California, and Zach. The next day, Richard approaches his colleague, Marianne, with a bold proposal. He wants to join the mission. Marianne warns him that he would die in space, but Richard counters that he would eventually die on Earth too. He argues that accompanying the children would allow him to raise, guide, and prepare them for the mission's dangers, ensuring their survival and success in the vast unknown. Hearing Richard's reasoning, Marianne reluctantly agrees, knowing he's right. 4 years later, the spacecraft Humanitas launches, carrying Richard and the 10-year-old children on the 86-year journey. As the ship ascends into space, the children settle into their rooms while Richard gazes at Earth one last time, bidding it farewell as the mission begins. 10 years into the voyage, the crew, now 20 years old, live highly structured and repetitive lives. Each day, they wake up and focus on their mission's importance for humanity's survival. They learn about the use of IVF to ensure their children and grandchildren will continue the mission and eventually reach the new planet. Their daily routine includes studying ship maintenance and performing cardio exercises in the gym before heading to the cafeteria for lunch, where they drink a distinctive blue liquid. One day, as Christopher and Zach enjoy music together, CA appears troubled. She confides in Richard, revealing her despair over the realization that she, like the rest of the crew, will die in space and never see the destination. Richard reassures her, showing her a photo of his parents and grandparents. He explains how his grandparents worked hard to raise his parents, who, in turn, raised him. He emphasizes that their purpose is to raise and prepare the next generation, which makes their lives meaningful and vital. The next day, while the crew tends to the plants that provide their food, Christopher notices a toxin in the irrigation water. He reports it to Richard, noting it originates from their recycled urine. Concerned, Christopher questions the safety of their food and drink. However, Richard dismisses his worries, explaining that their bodies are resilient to the toxin and instructs him to replace the filter. Still, Christopher's curiosity grows. He later investigates the toxin with his best friend, Zach, and discovers that it reduces pleasure responses and energy levels. Zach connects the dots and realizes the toxin is likely in the blue liquid they drink daily. Convinced that Richard is deliberately drugging them to keep them subdued, Christopher and Zach decide to stop drinking the blue liquid, preparing to confront the truth about their mission. After Christopher and Zach share their discoveries with their friends Kai and Julie, the group discusses the mysterious blue drink. They also uncover a hidden, unmarked compartment aboard the ship, which Richard had failed to mention. This revelation leads the four to suspect Richard is withholding the truth. By the end of the day, Christopher confronts Richard about the hidden compartment. Richard claims the compartment might be intended for Christopher's future grandchildren and explains that mission control only provides him with information on a need-to-know basis. Despite Christopher's suspicions, Richard maintains a calm demeanor during the conversation. Later, Richard records a video message to Mission Control on Earth, requesting permission to share the ship's secret information with the crew. He expresses concern that withholding the truth will erode their trust in him as a leader, emphasizing that if they sense he is lying, his leadership will be undermined. The next day, after lunch, Zach approaches CA and confesses that he likes her. However, when he grabs her arm, CA becomes uncomfortable. Richard intervenes, reminding Zach not to grab others. As the Voyagers haven't consumed the blue drink for days, Zach and Christopher begin experiencing an unusual surge of energy and euphoria. In the gym, they astonish everyone with their hyperactive wrestling and roughhousing. Their antics continue into the ship's corridors, where they catch sight of Richard placing his hand on CA's shoulder while speaking to her. This infuriates Zach, who feels jealous of Cila and perceives Richard as hypocritical for touching Cila after admonishing him earlier. Later, Richard calls a meeting and informs the Voyagers that the ship's external transmitter has malfunctioned, cutting off communication with Earth. He announces his intention to venture outside the ship to repair it, and insists that Zach accompany him on the mission. Shortly after Zach approaches Cila, she begins explaining how to wear the astronaut suit for his upcoming mission. However, Zach impulsively grabs her arm again, prompting Richard to intervene. Richard pushes Zach away, demanding to know what he's doing, and warns him that he'll be grounded if he doesn't explain himself. Instead of answering, Zach storms off, ignoring Richard entirely. While searching for Zach, Richard encounters Phoebe and asks if Zach has been acting strange. Phoebe mentions that Zach stopped drinking the blue liquid. Concerned, Richard questions Christopher about whether he's still drinking it. Christopher admits he's not and accuses Richard of drugging the crew. Richard counters, explaining that the blue drink is designed to suppress impulses and prevent violence and chaos aboard the ship. Christopher is deeply unsettled by this revelation. Rather than take Zach, Richard decides to bring Christopher outside with him to repair the ship's damaged transmitter. Initially, Christopher refuses, but Richard persuades him home by offering the chance to report the blue drink to Mission Control afterward and promises to support him. Reluctantly, Christopher agrees. Richard helps him put on the astronaut suit, and they venture outside the ship. As they glide through space, Christopher is awestruck by the beauty of the stars. Inside the ship, the rest of the Voyagers monitor their progress. Richard instructs Kai to turn off the transmitter, but as he does, a mysterious black object hurtles toward Richard, violently shaking the ship. In the ensuing chaos, Richard is struck and killed. An alarm blares as a fire breaks out in the system room. Shocked and grief-stricken, Christopher carries Richard's lifeless body back inside, while the rest of the crew scrambles to uncover what went wrong. Despite the crew's efforts to revive Richard, they fail. Cila, the chief medical officer, officially pronounces him dead. In the aftermath, Christopher gathers the Voyagers and asks if anyone noticed anything unusual before Richard's death. Edward mentions seeing a black object leaping toward Richard before he died. Christopher reassures the crew that whatever killed Richard outside the ship cannot harm them as long as they remain inside. However, the crew is anxious, worried about their future now that their leader is gone. Christopher tries to calm them, stating that Richard's death was inevitable. It just happened sooner than expected, and promises they'll be fine as long as they stick together. Once the ship's systems restart, Christopher asks Edward to replay the footage of the incident to understand what killed Richard. Unfortunately, the fire in the system room destroyed both the recording and the surveillance equipment. With Richard gone, the crew needs a new leader. Zach, as the head engineer, volunteers to take on the role. However, Julie insists on holding an election where everyone votes for the next leader. After the votes are counted, Christopher is elected, much to Zach's frustration. Although he bottles up his resentment, Zach congratulates Christopher on his victory. Christopher's first order, as chief officer, is for the crew to repair the damage to the system and surveillance equipment. Meanwhile, Ella looks through Richard's belongings and personal archive, reviewing memories of his life on Earth. Christopher visits her, and they watch recordings of Richard's time with his parents. Christopher asks Cila if there was anything between her and Richard, mentioning that he saw Richard touching her. Cila assures him there was nothing romantic. Richard simply needed a confidant. Together, they view a video Richard sent to Mission Control in which he shares his concerns for the crew. He explains that he joined the mission to protect them and ensure their safety. This leaves Cila wondering aloud, protect us from what? And adding softly, I want to protect him. Later, Christopher checks on the crew, but finds they aren't repairing the surveillance system as he ordered. Instead, Phoebe explains that the refrigerator broke down during the fire, and the crew is trying to salvage it. Zach suggests eating the food before it spoils, turning the situation into a feast to celebrate Christopher's election. Reluctantly, Christopher agrees. During the feast, some crew members consider drinking the blue liquid again, but Kai stops them, reminding them that Zach called it a drug. Convinced, the crew pours the drink out. This leads to a burst of uncontrollable energy and chaos among the crew in the gym, where they wrestle, play rough, and let loose. Meanwhile, Cila is alone elsewhere, completely unaware of the pandemonium unfolding around her. Shortly after, Zach and his friends sneak into Richard's room to watch his personal archive. Cila storms in and angrily orders them out, reminding them that she's responsible for safeguarding Richard's belongings. Once they leave, Cila secures the door to the room, but Zach taunts her, reminding her that Richard isn't around to protect her anymore. Feeling threatened, Cila responds that she doesn't need anyone's protection. This unsettling encounter prompts Cila to secretly arm herself with a scalpel for self-defense. Meanwhile, Christopher confronts Zach, warning him to stay away from Cila. Zach, defiant and irritated by Christopher's authority, dismisses the warning, claiming he'll do whatever he wants. The growing tension aboard the ship leads to chaos, culminating in a fight breaking out between Kai and Peter in the cafeteria. After breaking up the altercation, a frustrated Christopher gathers the crew to reprimand them for slacking off and neglecting their duties. He orders everyone to focus on repairing the system room and surveillance equipment, but some crew members refuse, voicing fears of an alien presence in the system room. Phoebe suggests fixing the surveillance so they can say what actually killed Richard, but Zach interrupts her, telling her to shut up and unleashing his anger toward Christopher. He openly questions Christopher's authority, declaring that he refuses to take orders from him. Despite Phoebe's reminder that Christopher was elected chief officer, Zach dismisses the election, claiming Christopher is unfit to lead. Zach then announces himself as the new leader, promising to feed the crew and protect them from any alien threat. His bold claims sway the majority of the crew to abandon Christopher and join him, while a few loyal members remain with Christopher. Determined to uncover the truth, Christopher secretly retrieves the surveillance drive from the system room before Zach arrives. Soon after, Zach and his group head to the system room in search of Christopher. Zach brings Kai with him inside, leaving the others outside. A commotion erupts inside, with Zach and Kai's shouts growing louder, as though they're fighting something. They eventually burst out of the room, yelling at the others to seal the door, claiming an alien attacked them. Back in safety, Christopher and Cila review the surveillance footage on the drive he recovered. Before they can make much progress, two crew members report the supposed alien attack on Zach and Kai in the system room. However, Cila quickly deduces that Zach and Kai likely went into the system room, intending to destroy the surveillance drive, attempting to cover up something they want to hide. This revelation heightens Christopher's curiosity. As Christopher repairs the damaged surveillance drive, he uncovers critical footage from earlier, revealing what Zach and Kai were doing while he and Richard were outside the ship, repairing the transmitter. The secrets captured in the recording may hold the key to understanding what really happened, and what Zach and Kai are hiding. During the repair mission outside the ship, Richard had ordered Kai to turn off the transmitter to prevent electrocution. However, Zach, still bitter about Richard keeping him away from Cila, spitefully turned the transmitter back on, intending to give Richard a minor shock. Instead, this action resulted in Richard's death. When Christopher and his group watch the recovered surveillance recording, they are horrified to learn that Zach deliberately caused Richard's electrocution. Christopher and Cila agree to keep the recording a secret for now, as it implicates Zach and Kai in murder. The next morning, Zach invites Christopher and his group to breakfast in the cafeteria, where he declares himself the new chief officer. However, Christopher seizes the moment to play the surveillance footage for everyone, exposing Zach and Kai as the ones responsible for Richard's death. He also reveals that the alien story is a lie fabricated by Zach to manipulate the crew. The revelation enrages the crew, and they turn on Zach. Surprisingly, Zach admits to killing Richard, but claims he did it because the alien was inside Richard's body. He accuses Christopher of bringing the alien into the ship when he retrieved Richard's body. Kai supports Zach's story, stoking fear by suggesting the alien could now be inside any of the crew. This causes panic, and the crew begins suspecting Peter. Before Christopher can regain control, the crew attacks Peter, believing he is hosting the alien. Peter tries to flee, but the mob catches and brutally beats him to death, ignoring Christopher's pleas to stop. With the chaos spiraling out of control, Christopher and his group find themselves cornered. Anda and Alex suggest pretending to join Zach's side, then killing him when he lowers his guard. However, the group lacks weapons, making their plan risky. Hearing the mention of weapons, Cila recalls a detail from Richard's video diary, a secret weapon compartment on the ship that Christopher knows about. Determined to arm themselves, Christopher searches for the hidden compartment. He sneaks into the vent system and finds the door to the compartment, but fails to unlock it, triggering loud beeping sounds from the keypad. The noise draws the attention of Tayo and Julie, who are nearby. Mistaking the sound for the alien, Julie decides to inform Zach. Meanwhile, Christopher retreats to find a tool to unlock the compartment. However, Zach and his group, alerted by Julie, break through the wall near the hidden compartment, hoping to access the weapons first. When Julie asks Zach if the beeping sound was caused by the alien, Zach immediately realizes it was Christopher's doing. Christopher rushes to warn his group, but Zach and his followers successfully force their way into the compartment. With tensions escalating, the race to control the weapons and the crew's future begins. Kai realizes the weapons in the hidden compartment are meant for their descendants when they reach the new planet. However, Zach dismisses this, claiming the weapons as theirs for immediate use. As Zach and his group arm themselves, Christopher, Cila, and Phoebe retreat to the briefing room to strategize. Meanwhile, Alex and Anta approach Zach's group, expressing interest in joining. Zach agrees on the condition that they reveal Christopher's location. Inside the briefing room, Christopher and the two girls monitor Zach's group through the cameras, noting the weapons they've secured while realizing their group only has a scalpel for defense. Desperate, Christopher devises a risky plan. He will pretend to join Zach's group and eliminate him when the opportunity arises. However, their planning is cut short when Cila notices Zach's group moving toward their location. Before they can act, Kai cuts the power in the briefing room. In the ensuing chaos, Zach's group breaches the room, capturing Christopher while Cila protests. Holding the scalpel secretly, Cila offers to join Zach's group to gain his trust. Zach, however, mocks her, turning her offer into a joke for his group's amusement. Phoebe, enraged by Zach's behavior, steps forward, urging him and his followers to stop fighting and work together. She appeals to their humanity, arguing that they must act rationally to survive as a group. Zach interrupts her, dismissing her words, but Phoebe stands firm, calling for peace and cooperation. Tensions escalate, and the group becomes increasingly divided. In the confusion, a shot rings out, and Phoebe falls, leaving everyone stunned, shocked by the violence. Cila drops the scalpel. Zach uses the incident to further consolidate his control, warning that defiance will not be tolerated. Turning his attention to Christopher, he aims a weapon at him, but Christopher escapes in the chaos, with Cila quickly following. The two flee to the plant room, crawling into the vents to evade capture. Zach and his group track them to the room. Believing Christopher is hiding in one of the vents, Zach orders his group to fire blindly into them, hoping to corner their quarry. With danger closing in, Christopher and Cila must find a way to outsmart Zach and his increasingly volatile followers. Christopher and Cila manage to escape from Zach and his group, retreating to the medical room where they lock the door. However, Kai quickly shoots the door open. As he enters, Christopher and Cila ambush him. Cila injects him with a sedative, while Christopher strikes him with an oxygen tank, fatally subduing him. Christopher takes Kai's weapon, and the pair move to another hiding place. Zach soon finds them, firing shots as he pursues. Christopher tries to fire back but is disarmed when Zach shoots his weapon. Forced to flee, Christopher and Cila lock every door behind them as Zach follows calmly, confident he will eventually corner them. They finally reach the airlock, where they quickly suit up for an escape into open space. Zach tracks them to the airlock and enters, only to be ambushed by Christopher and Cila. They open the hatch to space, creating a dangerous vacuum. In the ensuing chaos, Zach attacks Cila, attempting to force the hatch closed, but Christopher intervenes, leading to a fierce fight. The struggle ends with Christopher being thrown out of the ship, clinging to Zach's shirt for dear life. However, the shirt rips, sending Christopher drifting into space. Just as Zach tries to lock the hatch, Cila delivers a surprise kick, sending him hurtling into space, where he meets his inevitable end. Believing Christopher is lost, Cila desperately stops the hatch from closing, waiting breathlessly. To her relief, Christopher appears from afar, having managed to hold onto part of the ship. As he re-enters the airlock, Cila tears up with joy, relieved that he survived. Afterward, Christopher and Cila confront Zach's remaining followers, who initially hold them at gunpoint. Christopher assures them that Zach is no longer a threat, convincing them to lower their weapons. With Zach gone, the crew acknowledges Christopher's leadership, and order is restored on the ship. Life begins to return to normal as the crew resumes their shared meals and duties. To prevent such chaos from recurring, a new election is held for the position of chief officer, and Cila is chosen. During a video call with Mission Control, she reveals that the crew has stopped consuming the blue liquid. Instead, she emphasizes the importance of fostering trust and self-belief among the crew for the sake of their children and grandchildren. Months later, Christopher and Cila welcome a child, bringing hope and a sense of renewal to the ship. Over the decades, the children born on the ship grow up, forming a new generation ready to continue the mission. Eventually, the ship reaches its destination, a planet bathed in the light of a shining sun. This new world, bearing a striking resemblance to Earth, is declared habitable, marking the successful conclusion of a mission that spanned generations. The crew, both young and old, celebrates their arrival, knowing they've ensured a future for their descendants.